And I'll try not to cough my way through the whole thing. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll kick off here in just a minute. Apologize, I'm scratchy today. Cold coming home from school. Got me good. Okay. Well, we have hit our time, so I will go ahead and kick us off. So welcome again, everyone. And for those who don't know me, I am Megan Lebeda, and I'm a program manager here at Kirkwood Corporate Training. Today, we have Lisa Schaefer joining us to lead her session on generational training, and we're really excited to have her. This was a big request from the crowd, and we always like to put your requests at the forefront when we're planning these webinars. So Lisa Schaefer is an edutainer, which I love, and knowledge broker with 25 years of experience in engaging audiences with leadership and laughter. A certified John Maxwell speaker and coach, Lisa teaches the importance of trusted influence and leadership. She is passionate about creating cultures and organizations that help people shine. Lisa is a certified mental health first aid trainer, holds a school and community counseling license with Wisconsin DPI, and acquired her master's in education and bachelor's in psychology and marketing from the University of Wisconsin. Without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Lisa.
All right, Megan, thanks so much. And thank you so much for joining us today on the idea of motivating the generations. And like Megan said, I have been working in the industries and providing opportunities to coach and teach on the area of how do we work well together and how do we create a culture of unity with our teams. And so many times we talk about these generational belief systems and value systems. And what I'm asking people to do is really look at what are the strengths of every member of your team? Because every generation has their own needs and they have their own capabilities, and we all bring unique assets to the workforce. So, again, today our goal is to look at what are the strengths of each of these generations? What are the needs? And then are we clear on what the expectations are? Because what I'm learning is when we are clear and transparent about what our expectations are, we can coach people up to those expectations. A lot of times, conflict happens when we are not clear on what we're seeking or needing, or again, using as benchmarks of success. So I would ask you right off the bat, which one of these would you love to have? Each one of these cars is an amazing car. Each of these cars is a red car. Each of these cars have different skill sets that they're bringing to the table. A lot of times people will say, oh, I'd love the new one. Look at how flashy that one is. And look at it's got all the bells and whistles. And somebody will say, no, I really want the classic because you know what? It's all about tradition. One of the things that we have to look at in looking at the generations is what is it that we each bring to the table? What are our gifts? And what are our strengths? And then what are our opportunities that we need to, again, work with each other on? You know, as you're thinking of yourself and your team within your workplace, there may be some generational biases. There may be some stereotypes. You know, we see all the time some of these jokes about, oh, these boomers don't know how to use this equipment, or, oh, well, you know, these younger kids, they just don't know how to have good work ethic. We start to have all these different biases and these stereotypes that happen. And one of the things that I talk about is, you know, we do have different needs, but we all have a shared goal. And when we have that shared goal, we've got to say, what are some of the things that we can do together to unify and move forward? When we're starting to expose some of these generational stereotypes, this is where I ask you, you know, what is it in your current mindset that you're seeing that's working? And what is something that you see as an opportunity? And every generation looks at the next generation and may have some biases because you know what? We didn't do it that way. Well, why should they be able to do it that way? Or, you know what? This is the way we should be doing it. And why aren't they doing it? We will find ourselves sometimes shooting on each other because of the bias or the stereotypes. So, one of the first things I would ask you is, do you have any stereotypes? Do you have some belief systems that are getting in the way? Are we clear on what we do differently? Because we all work a little bit differently. You know, back in the day, there were people that were basically living to work. And I've met a lot of people that were like, you know what, I don't even have a hobby because I just live to work. Work is what I do, and that's just how things are. But nowadays you're starting to hear the importance of work-life balance. And work-life balance says, well, you know what? Maybe I'm not going to sit in an office between 8 and 5, but I'm flexible and I can, be online throughout different times of the day. Even the idea of working remotely, again, at one time was basically seen as a very different piece. So, trying to understand, first of all, what is it that we want? What is our definition of success for our team? And when we start to look at definition of success, it's really our mindset. We often have a lens where we look through based on our previous upbringing, our societal changes. We sometimes just try to oversimplify things, and we don't focus enough on what we have in common. So, I do want to really focus on this idea of trying to ditch some of these stereotypes, because, again, it sometimes gets in our way of unifying and saying, what's it going to take for us to all work together? There's different stereotypes out there. There's a myth that they respect authority and don't like the boat. But again, that silent generation, there was a lot of things where they were trying to push and be innovative and move forward. Baby boomers, they maybe have this competitive workaholic mindset. A lot of times the baby boomers are being compared to the millennials, that you have some things in common that you want to be able to make a difference. A lot of times Gen X are basically, well, they just want to work alone. They want to do their own thing. They don't want to focus on a lot of the, policy and procedures. Not always the case. And these Gen Zers, they've been a part of the internet. They see everything. It's no privacy anymore. Everything's open. They overshare. You have all these stereotypes. So one of the things I would ask as a team is to sit down and think of, what are those behaviors that maybe are getting in the way of us working together successfully? I like to talk about the behaviors and not the personality characteristics, because we do have some stereotypes. And what are those? Let's dialogue them and let's basically break it down into what our definition of success is. One of the big things I like to say is, what does professionalism mean? Every generation might have a different look of what professionalism means. For some individuals, professionalism is wearing a three-piece suit. Again, I've worked with financials, and a lot of times there was where this professionalism that if you're dealing with money, that you need to wear a suit. And that was a big part of the dress code, and somebody would say, well, these people today, they're wearing jeans, they're wearing t-shirts. I'm not going to trust them. What are those behaviors, those stereotypes, and then how do we move through some of these things? So the very first thing that I would ask you, if you do feel as though you have to manage somebody who does have different value systems, different belief systems, is just to articulate maybe where you have those differences. But then again, what is it that you have in common? Ask the questions. One of the things that we need to do in generations is just say, what's the best way to communicate? A lot of times my traditionalists are basically saying, you know what, I don't need to talk too personal. I don't like to do any of those, icebreaker things. I don't really need to express my feelings. I just want to try to get some work done. Where again, somebody will say, well, what's the best way to communicate? A lot of times people will say, well, I'd really like a phone call. Best way to communicate is a phone call. Some people will say, no, 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 you know what? I want to be able to meet. I want to be able to sit face to face. Boomers a lot like to find themselves in meetings and getting together and trying to, again, face to face types of things to talk and see what's going on. My Gen Xers, a lot of times, we have this conversation of, looking at your text messages. A lot of times, just make it short, sweet, bold, and direct, quick and direct. And I don't want to have to spend a whole lot of time because I want to get stuff done and get results moving forward. My millennials, again, sometimes the joke is that they don't even answer the voicemails if you're not keeping it as a Teams chat. What is the best way to communicate? And it's truly, again, asking your teams. So the very first thing to really have a good management and leadership style for your teams is to talk about, what are those behaviors that are working? What are those behaviors that maybe are opportunities? What's the best ways for us to communicate? We don't dialogue this enough. And then we just get into the stereotype, well, that's just them. They don't know anything, or, oh, they just have a different belief system, or we've got to have the tough talks in the radical candor to be able to have some of these conversations with each other. And then really focus on this idea of every single one of us, no matter what generation we're in, we have behavior that is goal directed. So if we're having struggles in managing each other, in supporting each other, what is the actual goal we're trying to achieve? So I want you to get very clear on what your expectations are, especially if you're saying, well, we have an attendance policy. Here's the expectations. Here's where things are flexible. Well, what does flexible mean? Does flexible mean, you can come in at 8:30 and go home at 4:30? Or does it mean you can work from home? You can work remote? What does work remote mean? We've got to get goal directed and specific on what those things mean. Because every single one of us are motivated by these four things. So every behavior we do is basically one, we want to feel as though we have a sense of achievement. A lot of times people will say, "Oh, well, these boomers, they were workaholics. They just want to keep working and they'll work 60, 70, 80 hours." Well, this younger generation, they don't want to work that long because, they watch their parents and their grandparents give away all their time and they want to have more time for their kids. You see different belief systems, but they all have a need for a sense of achievement. We all have a need for affiliation. We all want to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. So, what is it that we need to do to be affiliated? And then, really, we want to be able to feel as though we have some control over our decision making. Do we have some power? Do we have the freedom to make some decisions? Every single one of us may have an idea of how we break down and do critical thinking, and oftentimes we don't do enough of those types of things within our workplace. I always ask people, do you have a genius hour or a 20% time where you bring different age groups together and give them a goal or a sense of achievement and say, we want you to be able to come up with a product or a service or a strategy that's going to help our team be successful. And then have dialogue around each of those particular areas. We also are goal directed that we will do things because we want to try to avoid punishment or pain. Again, that's where a lot of times policies are put into place. And so people will say, well, I'll follow the policy because I don't want this to happen. And again, people sometimes will say, well, rules are meant to be broken. And somebody else will say, no, rules are standard operating procedure so that we can all stay consistent. And that's where sometimes we have to dialogue as a team. What is our definition of success? What is our expectations of great? What's our expectations of average? What are our needs of improvement ideas? And then ultimately, what are our negotiables and what are our non-negotiables? And when we start to have these dialogues and these conversations, it's going to help us in motivating each other. And when we're able to motivate each other, it's going to help us really look at that ultimate goal. So when you're looking at motivation of different age groups, many times people will say, well, you know what? We got to look at some of the values. Many times values are where we have some conflict. So if I have a success conflict, I need to know what that looks like. If I have a value of time, I don't want to give up a lot of time. I don't want to waste time. I want to be able to come with a solution quickly. How many of you work with Gen Xers and they want to say, well, who's doing what by when? A lot of times Gen Xers want to have an action item or an action plan because, again, time is very important. Millennials often say, well, I want to be able to be an individual. I want to be able to create and be innovative. I want to be able to have a time where we share what are some best practices and then how do we make them 1% better. And then, of course, your Zoomers, well, I want to have some social responsibility and I want to be able to have a way to have psychological safety where we can be different and come to the table. Even though we have differences, we all have that same goal. So the big thing is really, what is the goal? What is your goal for your team? What are your company policies? What does job security look like? What are the relationships? What is your pay? What is your working conditions? These are all motivators for each of the generations. And so we've got to be able to have kind of a discussion around what those values are and what's that look like? So again, if you're trying to work with a cross-generational team, we've got to know what's that definition of success. Are we increasing sales? Are we increasing our customer service rating? Are we, again, looking at some of these benchmarks of achievement? And then how we get to those achievement might be different for each of the groups. Are we delegating and giving people a chance to go independently and then come back and say, here's what I've learned, and then make a decision together? Or are you delegating and then basically saying, go research this and bring it back to me because I'm ultimately going to make the final decision? What is it that you're doing for your goal? You know, a lot of times people always say, oh, work ethic. This is the one I hear all the time. Oh man, this younger generation, they just don't have a very good work ethic. It's just a different work ethic. You know, again, it's non-traditional. You will see sometimes, again, the number one motivator for your individuals who are younger is the flexibility. And more people are saying, well, I have to be flexible to be able to get the younger staff to be able to participate. Again, a lot of hybrid models, a lot of work from home, work from remote. I've even met where they have unlimited vacation. Some of these companies are saying, well, here's your goals. And if you meet those goals, you figure out your vacation, you know, talk with your supervisors. So being able to look at some of these non-traditional approaches to work. But a lot of times people are like, well, we never had it that way. Why are we doing this? We've got to know what the goal is. And when you start to look at this idea of authority, you know, a lot of times people say, well, I'm questioning authority. Why do I have to, go up the ladder? Why can't I just go have an open dialogue? You know, the younger generation is very used to being collaborative, and the older generation, or more experienced generation, is much more hierarchical. So within your company, what is the goal of communication? Do we have an open dialogue where we can just go and coach each other? Or do we have a hierarchical system? And so we have to be able to explain and dialogue those types of things to our staff members. I get this one too a lot. Well, this group, we give out trophies for everybody. Everybody wants a trophy. Well, again, it's an idea of, well, what are we doing? What are our skills? Is the expected KPI? What are our key performance indicators? And then do we have this idea to do pilot projects where we test things? Do we have the opportunities to have mentors? Do we have the idea where people are like, well, you know what? I do have to put my time in, and here's what my time looks like. One of the things that I've learned with my younger generation is they do have a need for instant gratification, but they want to know, like, what's my progress here? What does my career ladder look like? Do you have a career ladder set up where you can show people, hey, this is what a high potential looks like. Here's some things that we can do. Do you keep your younger staff engaged in training? Do you give them kind of roles where they can support and be creative? And ultimately, giving opportunities for a little bit of diversity. But this idea of, you got to put your time in. Sometimes people will move up the ladder quickly because they are able to have a big picture. So really focusing on, each person and having a little bit of a success plan and what that looks like for them. Because the big thing is we've got to be able to unify. So we all want to be helpful. We all want to be impactful. We all want to be learners. We all want to increase our skills. We all want to improve our skills. So let's start looking at all the things we have in common. We all want to feel valued. We all want to feel appreciated, and we want to have fair compensation. A lot of times people will say, well, my staff just aren't engaged. They're constantly worrying about this, this, and this. Sometimes I ask, are you competitive with your salaries? You might have people who would leave for a quarter. You might have people who will leave for 50 cents. But a lot of times people won't leave for that if they feel connected and they feel appreciated and they feel valued. We all have a tendency to want job security, and we all want to be able to feel as though we can take the next level or that next step and have that advancement if brought together. And again, we ultimately want to be able to feel as though we are making a difference and have meaning. So when you're looking at generations, I would ask everybody to talk about, what do we need to keep doing, stop doing, and start doing to meet our goal? What's that look like for us? How are we impacting our customer? Who is our customer? And we have internal customers and we have external customers. So really creating opportunities where you are unified. Hey, if our goal is to increase sales by 35%, I don't care what generation you are. What does great look like? What are the 3 things that we are all going to agree to do? And the more clarity you have on your expectations and be very specific on the behaviors, that's when you start to create this unity and get rid of some of this, well, this younger generation, this older generation. You get rid of some of that drama that inhibits psychological safety. So, what is our goal? What does great look like? What are 3 things? What's average look like? What's needs of improvement look like? Get specific. What do we have in common? What do we need to keep doing, stop doing, and start doing in order to unify? And when we do that, that gives us a chance to get motivated. But I'll tell you right now, I'm seeing a lot of organizations that find themselves a little bit insensitive. And maybe we don't have the trust that we need. And sometimes people will say, well, if we've got too much collaboration, who's actually in charge? Sometimes I would ask you, when you have collaborative types of sessions, who's doing what by when? And then being able to hold each other accountable to that and letting people know, hey, this is a hard deadline, or maybe this is a soft deadline. And then ultimately, who has final say? What does that look like? Because it's a demotivator really, really quickly if we start to have insensitivity, if we start to nitpick at each other, if we have a lack of trust because people aren't following through or holding themselves or each other accountable. That, no matter what generation, is going to cause some problems. So again, get your teams together and basically say, what are we looking at? Where do we fall? One of the big things that Gallup does, and if you're a Gallup fan, they always talk about this importance of engagement. And what are some of those things that you're bringing to the table, no matter what generation you are, that's going to create more unity and create more effectiveness within your groups? Well, this is a quiz that a lot of people will send out to their staff just to say, how engaged are we? And what you're noticing, that these top 10 questions, doesn't matter what generation you're in, these are the top 10 things that keep people engaged in the workplace. So are we taking time to be able to do some of these things? We talk about this idea of appreciation. We did a lot of what we call Feedback Friday. And sometimes people will say, well, I'm from the generation that no news is good news. And another generation will say, well, I need feedback. I'm used to be giving feedback. So we talk about Feedback Friday. And Feedback Friday basically says, at the end of the week, I might send out an email that basically says, hey, congratulations. Here's some things that were some wins for us this week. And here's some things that were some opportunities yet for us to explore. And here's some things that we're looking forward to next week. Sometimes people will call this the highs or the lows of the week. And being able to get people on the same page of, do I have recognition? Do I understand what's going on? Am I able to have dialogue with each other where we feel supported and connected? If I'm a supervisor, do I feel like I'm helping people in their career growth and showing them the stackable opportunities to move up the ladder within the organization? Do I have the right tools to carry out my equipment, my responsibilities? Again, no matter what generation you're in, these are those top 10 things that people need in order to stay engaged. And oftentimes people are, we always want to just make it easy and just say, well, that's just that boomer generation. That's just that millennial. Those Xers, they only want to work, by themselves. These are the 10 things that keep you engaged. So I would ask you just to kind of, again, focus on where are you at? And what is it that's working for you? What are you currently doing to engage all of your generations? What are some of your best practices? Oftentimes when we're mentoring, when we have new staff that we're onboarding, we'll ask a senior representative to be a mentor. And then we will ask them to share basically what their strengths are with their mentee, and then the mentee to share their strengths, and then look at what they have in common, and then look at the differences and how they can support each other. So what are you doing? Are you giving credit? Are you sharing kind of this multi-approach, this generational approach? Are you, again, creating collaborative workspaces where we can address psychological safety? What do we need to do to be able to work together? When you start to look at, again, the younger generation, we calling them the Zoomers, we talk about this importance of technology integration. Being able to have apps, being able to have dashboards. On the dashboards, are we showing progress? Are we giving people your KPIs to see where they're at? Do we give feedback? If we're trying to motivate these Zoomers, and I'm hearing more and more people like, how do I get people to show up for work? Well, again, there's that work-life balance. Is there some flexibility? More and more, again, this younger generation wants to be able to have kind of say over scheduling. And so can we get creative? I remember back in the day prior to COVID, when I was doing some trainings and motivation, and I said, what would it take for people to do more work from home? And a lot of people are like, there's no way we could do work from home. It would never work. And I work a lot with financials, and they're like, oh, the security would be terrible. And then all of a sudden on March 13th of 2020, it seemed like the IT departments had about 24 hours to get everybody to work from home, and they were able to do it. So sometimes, what is it that we can do to create flexibility? What does that flexibility look like? And what would it take to create somewhat of a work-life balance? We also talk about this idea of, I'm going to tell you, we need to have some meaningful impact, or what's called purpose-driven work. People want to show up and they want to feel as though they've made a difference. And how many of you have ever used the because of you strategy? Because of you, I was able to learn this. Because of you, I was able to take this away. Because of you, I was able to have more empowerment. Do you talk about how each other's role impacts the others? We also have what's called an SBI approach, the situation, behavior, impact. Here was the situation. Here's what happened. Here was the behavior that we saw, and here was the impact that it had. Keeping people engaged in how they make a difference and how what they do is important. That's a motivator. And again, our younger generation wants to see some purpose, career development, inclusivity, diversity, transparency. Sometimes people get really nervous. Well, I can't share everything with everybody. I realize you can't, and there's some things that you have to, again, keep confidential, but there's times where you can be very transparent and being able to be direct. Hey, here's some things that are working. Here's a pilot project we're going to do. Here's some opportunities that we have. Here may be some barriers that we're going to have. Here's some strategies we're going to do to move through that. Here's some things that we're going to take away. Here's some things that aren't going to change. When you get transparent and you can be direct in your communication, your younger generation is going to be very thankful on that. People also want to have stability. They want to have financial security. They want to be able to have this idea of being able to share ideas. That's why, again, I love the idea of a genius hour or a 20% time. A genius hour, again, is just an hour a week, an hour a month, whatever your team decides. And you bring people together just to collaborate on getting creative. This is basically an innovative hour. If you had your perfect dream, what would it look like? And what do you think it would take to get there? And being able to have that type of dialogue gives motivation to many of your teammates. So looking at a genius hour. The other big thing is this gamification. People want to be able to see progress. They want to see how things are going. Sometimes people will say, well, I'm going to put my goals on a thermometer and I'm going to start giving visuals. Maybe you're doing that through a SharePoint dashboard. You're giving people a chance to see where are you rating with your KPIs. If you're an HR department and you have onboarding and you have classes that people have to take, are you giving away little trophies as they meet their tiers of classes? People like that gamification. People want to have fun. Now, sometimes people are like, oh man, work isn't supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be work. That's why they call it work. Nowadays, again, people want this need for connection and they want to feel as though it is fun. And again, there's going to be some times that things aren't going to be fun. And that's where we sometimes tell people we've got to embrace the suck. My military friends will always say, yeah, embrace the suck was a total military approach. But sometimes there's going to be 10% of your job that you just have to do, and it's just not the best. But you just have to do it. So again, helping people see that and being able to kind of move through that. But again, open communication, transparent. Hey, I think you and I see things differently. What do we need to do to be able to work together? I've had that happen many times in some mentorships. I've got a younger generation that basically says, I want more flexibility. I don't want to be sending emails at midnight. Okay, well, what's the best way for us to communicate? Well, we're going to meet one-on-one one week, and then we'll do a text message the next week. You're coming up with some plans to be able to be transparent and foster open communication where you can have good radical candor. Maybe you have to offer some flexible work arrangements. Maybe you need to give a chance for some remote work, some hybrid work. A lot of places are going to 4-day weeks right now because people want that extra time. Do you have a flexible office? There are ways where people sometimes will have different options where they can work from different offices if there's multiple locations of an organization. Again, just trying to help this idea of really maybe there's going to be some times where we have to go part-time. Uh, Being able to promote those flexibility. There was one group that I had met where they were having their entire staff create their own schedule. And that way they had to get coverage if there was something that was missing. And what they found is when they were giving them the empowerment to make their own schedule, they were able to kind of cover for each other. They were able to get creative with each other. And as long as there was coverage on the floor, whatever worked out, worked out. The minute there wasn't coverage, if there was something that happened, then there was dialogue and there was conversations to say, hey, this is what happened. We can't have this happen again. What's it going to take to make sure this works? So again, just looking at flexible working arrangements. Now, sometimes people are like, Lisa, we're not going to be flexible. We just don't have that option. What does flexible look like? Even simple small things, like I said earlier, maybe I have kids and I have to take kids to daycare, and maybe I can't get there until 8:30 versus 8 o'clock. But you know what? I can maybe stay until 5:30 versus 5 o'clock. Again, look at flexibility. Maybe again, cross training. Flexibility sometimes means cross training. Maybe I need to learn a little bit about everything so that, again, I am not always just sitting in the same type of process. I'm seeing more and more manufacturing companies move to cross training to help keep people engaged. The other big thing, too, is, with any motivation, with any group, we've got to be able to give career development. People want to see, again, progression because we all have a need for achievement. So, are there some things that your company is doing to have career development, career conversations? How many of your supervisors sit down with the staff and just do a quick, hey, in the next 5 years, where would you like to see yourself in the organization? What are some steps that you could take to possibly get there? Now, again, we're not guaranteeing jobs, but we're just having the conversation to say, here's some of the possibilities. And when people see progress, they stay more connected because they want to see that sense of achievement or those results. Maybe I'm taking different EQ assessments. Maybe I'm taking different learning styles assessments. Maybe I'm taking a DISC, a colors, an MBTI, maybe a strengths finder, where I'm learning a little bit more about myself and about my team. I've worked a lot in helping people see DISC and colors. Those two are probably my very popular trainings that I do because it gives people a chance to look at their differences, but then also what they have in common. And it helps minimize some of the drama because we start making assumptions and stereotypes. I maybe forget to say good morning. Does that mean that I don't like you? No, it just means that maybe I have too many things on my plate and maybe I'm thinking about things and I forgot to say good morning. Maybe I have too many agenda items. Maybe my emails have a whole list of things that need to get done. Well, maybe that's just a different style. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to get to all of them. I just like to break them all out. So, any of those assessments to help your teams get on the same page, I would highly recommend a DISC, an MBTI, an EQ assessment, again, dialoguing those career explorations. The other big thing is just, mentor groups and peer-to-peer learning. Again, we have done several things with high potentials within the organizations where we identify some behaviors or some skill sets that we want. And then we give them a chance to be able to go through some leadership training and give them support. Now, sometimes people are like, well, this younger generation, they don't want all this training. Most people want the training to be able to say, hey, I've learned a new skill. And now maybe I can get some type of micro credential, or maybe I can see a sense of achievement, and maybe I'm learning something from somebody. Peer to peer mentoring is huge, and it certainly helps people move past some of the fear. So create some opportunities for development. Doesn't matter what generation you're in. Now, some people will say, well, I'm ready to retire. How many of you guys have that person who's ready to retire and they've got the retirement calculator on their phone and you're like, oh my gosh, they're counting down their retirement? I like to encourage and say, hey, you know what? I realize your retirement's coming up, but how do you want to leave this place? What do you want your legacy to be? Tell me what's that look like for you? And that's where sometimes we jump in and have some of these career conversations. You know, do you want to leave a legacy? What do you want your department to look like? What do you want the organization to look like? What do you want people to say when you walk out that day? And again, helping people see the importance of their situation, what their behavior does, and that impact that they have on each other. And then you also want to continue to look at this idea of really focusing on, you know, ultimately, I need to be a contributor. And then recognize and reward those contributors. You know, a lot of times people will say, well, I don't need the watch. I don't need this. I don't need that. It can just be a simple thank you. We don't say thank you enough. And what I'm learning, it doesn't matter what generation you're in, a thank you will go a long way if it is a specific and genuine thank you. Thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to learn a little bit more about these strategies. Simple, specific feedback helps people get recognized on the behaviors you see that are valuable and that you want to increase. Now, there are specific recognition programs, there's reward contributions, there's a variety of different things that people can do. One of the assessments I love is helping people understand, how do you want to be appreciated? Again, some of the younger staff will say, hey, you know what? I do like to be able to have social time. I like to be able to connect. Somebody else might say, I just need a thank you. I don't need any big grandiose type of thing. I've done many times where people will do the 5 languages of appreciation within the workplace. They take this assessment and then we have the conversation. What's the best way for me as a leader or as a manager to be able to recognize you? What's the best way for me as a colleague to be able to thank you so that you feel as though you're appreciated? Because again, the number one reason why people quit a job is because they don't feel appreciated. So, do I have a word of affirmation? Thank you note. Again, verbally praise them with specifics. On this day during this meeting, I thought you brought up some really great ideas that help people think differently. Quality time. I've had a lot of people in the C-suite. They will open up and they'll have coffee with the CEO. And basically, the CEO will say, hey, you know, I'm going to be open today from 9 to 9:30 for coffee. Stop down. Let's just have some open dialogue. Sometimes people want to have some of that quality time. They want to be able to have that hierarchy and be able to have an understanding of what the direction is and where we're going. Some of the younger staff love that. Some of the and extras love the chance to be able to dialogue to say, I want to make it about you. The CEO makes it about them. Hey, what's working? What have you seen that's worked? What is it that you need to be successful? And again, just having some open dialogue, open conversation, that quality time, that's really important. I've learned that too as people get a little bit older, that time is valuable. So again, I've got to make it worth their time to have quality time. So again, what is it that you're hoping for? What is your goal? What is your intention of the quality time and the conversation? And what's your action items? You will see people have acts of service. This is again where people will stop and step in and say, hey, how can I help? You might see tangible gifts. You know, I had one lady who was supervising an entire production floor, and she had a list of every single person's favorite soda and candy. She had done an interview during their onboarding, basically said, hey, if you know, what's your favorite candy? What's your favorite restaurant? What's your favorite food? And what she does is the minute she hears something that there was a positive that happened, she goes and she gives them a gift certificate, a little like $5 gift certificate to their favorite restaurant, or she'll drop off their favorite candy or their favorite soda. Again, just little token to share appreciation for what they're doing. Physical touch, a high five. And again, I always caution people, please don't physically touch anyone until you talk to HR if it's appropriate, or ask, hey, do you need a hug? That's fine, whatever. But again, be careful with that one. So again, just realizing that all of us have different belief systems, but we have more things in common, and we've got to focus on those common goals. Get rid of the divide. We are observing too many times where it's an us and them attitude. And if we can get rid of the divide, that's where we start having this inclusivity and respect for each other. You know, we all have different strength sets. We all bring things to the table. Many people that I know may have more experience in communication. Somebody may have more experience in technology. Being able to work together on that clear vision. But you gotta focus on what those common goals are. What are we trying to work towards? And when we have a common goal, conflicts can be minimized because we can say, is what we're doing right now helping or hurting our organization move forward? There's different tactics. If you want to try to look at certain collaboration pieces, I love Center for Creative Leadership. Lots of great free resources out there that you can focus on. And this one tactic, again, gives people a chance to really look at what is it that we need to do for cross-generational teams. Well, I've got to be able to explore new technology. I've got to be able to reduce some repetitive routine tasks. I've got to be able to look at balancing off hours coverage so nobody has to work 24/7. I've got to be able to set up a mentor program. I need to be able to focus on, hey, here's why we're doing it. If you're rolling out change and you don't roll out change with the why you're changing and what you're changing to, what the plan looks like, and what's not changing, you're going to have a lot of resistance no matter what. Now, a lot of times people will say, well, it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks if you're not clear on what you want it is. But if you can get specific as to what you want, the steps to take to learn it and get there and offer the resources and support, you can totally teach an old dog new tricks. So again, focusing on those particular areas. Leverage, engage people. These are, again, some great tools that you can find. Again, rewarding people, keeping their morale, getting people into special activities. Sometimes people want the activities, some people don't. Giving people just a quick check-in. Every meeting start out with, are you here today? Are you here today? Are you here today? I walked into a company the other day and they had red flags, green flags, and yellow flags in their cubicles. And I'm like, what's with the flags? And they're like, oh, green flag says, I'm having a good day. Come on in. Everything's good. We can have some open dialogue and discussion. I'm like, okay. Yellow flag says proceed with caution. And a red flag is, oh, not today. And I said, well, how many times do you get to the red flag? And then they said they don't get the red flag because what happens is when somebody puts a yellow flag in, somebody will step in and say, is there everything you need to do to be supported? Is there anything I can do to help you today? Again, engaging people, engaging them remotely is key as well. So getting people a chance to get connected and leverage that. And the big thing too, is like I said, is gamification. This one is becoming so important for your younger generation. It's kind of like the Fitbit. How many of you are tracking your steps and you're tracking your macros and you're tracking everything. This gives you a chance to set the goals, set the objectives, pick those KPIs, get the game going, and then start helping people get badges, helping people learn and achieve and move forward. Again, looking at those environments, adapting, giving them a chance to explore. So when you do a gamification, that's certainly a motivator for all of us. It is a motivator for us to be able to see a sense of achievement. Hey, when you are able to complete your onboarding, you get the badge of honor for completion. And then, next tier level, tier 1, tier 2, here's your technical skills. Giving people some type of badge helps that gamification process. It's, again, thinking of it as a video game. You want to be able to take and meet those next goals. And then the other big thing, no matter what generation, we all need increase of workplace wellness and health. This is something that is becoming so important. As a mental health first aid instructor, I focus on this idea that every single one of us at some time may have an acute stress disorder. Acute stress disorder basically says some type of stressful situation that impacts us at work, and it lasts less than 6 months. We might have a stressful situation with childcare. We might have a stressful situation with aging parents. We might have a stressful situation with just learning a new process. Again, we've got to be able to have support for each other. Now, sometimes my older generation might say, well, I got this. I'm fine. Fine stands for feelings inside, not expressed. And so sometimes I just want to say, well, here's some different things that we can do to help increase wellness and health. Comfortable workplace, feedback, time off, vacation, reasonable amounts of work, knowing what that workload looks like. Sometimes we overschedule people. And if we overschedule people, no matter what generation, it may be overwhelming. Sometimes my older generation will say, well, I don't know why they think they're overworked. They're not anywhere close to being overworked. Again, remember, we grew up in different eras, and those different eras define work differently. I grew up on a farm. You work 24/7. That's just what you do because the cows aren't going to milk themselves. So you have different belief systems, different values. But what do we have in common? We all want to feel a sense of achievement and we want to have a goal to accomplish. So focus on that. Celebrate those milestones. What do you want to celebrate? Birthdays, achievements, promotions, life milestones, retirements, any of those different types of things. And when you do that and you have those resources, it helps people kind of focus on this idea of, you know what, we're all in this together and we do want to celebrate the successes, but we also want to focus on this idea of being able to help each other, support each other. When we have psychological safety within our organizations, we can have open dialogue and we can start to say, hey, I see it this way. Maybe my experience in the past has been this. What has been your experience? What do we need to do to work together? Because I think we're all on the same page. We just maybe are dialoguing different on how to get there. So have the dialogues, get the information. There is great books out there. Generations at Work is a great book that talks a lot about, again, just recognizing the fact that we have some clashes, but we have more things in common than we do different. And then Unleashed also gives you a chance for helping empower the people around you. And again, focusing on just really, truly, what is it that we all bring to the table? Have the crucial conversations, dialogue, what's working. Focus on this idea of, you know what, 1% better today. What can we do to be 1% better? And when we focus on 1% better, we can all move towards that goal. So I do want to take a minute and just, again, give you a chance. I'd like to leave the last 15 minutes for questions or for some best practice. What have you done that has helped motivate the generations within your workplace? Or what questions do you have that maybe you want to get answered? So the chat is open. Feel free to go ahead and type in the chat. I can see any of the chats that will come through and be able to address those concerns or those questions. So again, any best practices that you're doing to motivate your generations, or again, any questions you may have. The Gen Alphas are entering the workplace. And again, that is the flexibility. They're wanting to be able to know what those expectations are. And then how do I get there? There's a lot of creativity coming out of the Gen Alphas. They are looking at a lot of the gig economy and being able to say, hey, I need some gigs. Just tell me what are the 3 things you want me to achieve and then let me achieve them. So again, a lot of times there's a lot of structure. If there's too much structure, that can get in the way. So getting that creative sense, giving them a chance to say, hey, these are the 3 things I want you to be able to achieve this week, and what are steps you're going to take to get there. So again, those were some of the key pieces that were looked at with the younger generation like that. The other big thing, my friends, is please remember, we have to have patience. These are their first jobs. Sometimes we compare our journey to their journey, and put yourself into the mindset that, hey, I can help support this person in their first job. I can help teach them the importance of, hey, here's some things that we need to do to ask questions. Here's how we can dialogue. Here's some things that we ask. Here's some things that maybe are appropriate. Again, take the mindset that we are here to mentor, and we should always be mentoring each other. They will be mentoring us. How many times have you gone to a younger generation and say, hey, help me with this? I think you see things differently. Help me understand this process. The more we can get rid of the barriers and start to just cross communicate, the more effective we're going to be as a team. So thank you for sharing that question.
Any other questions or comments for Lisa as we wrap up today? All right, seeing none. Thank you so much for your time, Lisa. This was wonderful. I am going to launch a poll for our participants here. If you could just take 2 seconds before you jump off and head back to work to fill that out to help us know what you're looking for in these webinars and how we can provide you what you're needing. That would be very much appreciated. Ian says, thank you, Lisa. So that's great. Anybody else have anything else to say before I let you get back to your day? All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Our next webinar will be held in November on the 12th. I hope you can join us then and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, everybody.